principals, this presentation is called Beyond the Gold Star, really thinking about this familiar image of gold stars, stickers, reward charts. Most of us grew up with them. Many of us have used them, and I put the carrot and the stick, right? We kind of see this image with zone of proximal development, right? Putting the carrot close enough and then pulling it back, kind of like creating scaffolds. But what I want to be honest about is in schools, they seem to work, at least at first. But here's the question we really can't ignore. Are we truly building long-term self-regulations or short-term compliance? So today's conversation is about moving beyond the gold star, beyond these rewards towards something much stronger, that self-motivation that lasts. Not behavior that depends on like our prizes, our rewards, or the little skittle that you give after they've done an assignment. But thinking about this behavior that's kind of rooted deeply in purpose, connection, and true growth. I love this slide. We're talking about rewards don't motivate. They motivate people to get more rewards, right? Abby Khan said this, and I think this really resonates with kind of what's happening now, right? That reward, that excitement, that quick win for our students and teachers, it seems. So this is really from the lens of not only a teacher, but principals as we go in and we observe our classrooms, really keeping this in mind. So we have this compliance versus connection. On this slide, I think we see two very different approaches. Compliance is that transactional thing that we're seeing a lot in our classrooms. It sounds like you do this and you get that. Really thinking about the reward charts and incentives and focusing on this external control. We are kind of teaching students to behave when the reward is present, right? But too often when the reward is gone, it's kind of like, well, what do I get for doing this? So thinking about what is the connection, on the other hand, is foundational. When students feel seen, they feel supported, they are valued, they begin to internalize their expectations. Really thinking about compliance manages behavior. And the continuous connection builds student character. So there's this idea called like the candle problem, right? Thinking about this research, it helps explain why rewards kind of often fail in our classrooms now. In a study focused on creative problem solving, the group offered incentives. They took 3.5 minutes or longer to kind of solve the problem. And you're asking, Cassandra, why does this matter? Because reward kind of narrows thinking as well. So they may work for simple routine tasks, but they interfere with creativity and flexibility and true deep learning. So thinking about if we want innovative thinkers, rewards may actually slow them down. So now we're talking about what's the motivation. So decades and decades of research point to these three drivers of intrinsic motivation. First is the autonomy, right? The desire to want to have control over one's learning. The second one is kind of that mastery, the drive to kind of get better and better at something more meaningful. And the third is purpose. What is the purpose, right? And the need to feel like this work needs to matter for me. And so sometimes when we think about rewards, it often undermines these three by shifting the focus to instant gratification. So when schools prioritize this autonomy, the mastery, and the purpose, motivation becomes self-sustaining. I always like to say the clap back is good job, right? Why good job kind of backfires in all situations. So even the positive reinforcement can have some unintended effects. So when rewards or praises are expected, the student begins to continue working for the reward and not for the intrinsic learning. So this is known as that overjustification effect. Once the reward is removed, effort and interest then drop, kind of below where it actually started. And this doesn't mean we stop encouraging students, because we continue to encourage students, but it does mean that we need to be more intentional, focusing on positive feedback, constructive feedback, right? Focusing on our effort, our strategy, and our growth rather than our evaluation. I always say these two areas can get a little fuzzy at times, the bribe versus the support. Right? And this slide pretty much highlights the important distinction and the difference between the two. The bribe, it happens during kind of the misbehavior, right? Thinking that, for example, you sit down, I'll give you this. That approach kind of reinforces that negotiation, that kind of entitlement. So thinking about our support, right? That happens after the effort. So for example, like now that we finished, let's kind of celebrate our work. So the same action, but a very different message. And so thinking about supporting strengths and supporting community, we want to do away with bribe because it does weaken expectations. Now remember, this needs to sometimes come from principals in professional development, right? Thinking about how do we kind of shift the narrative. And so I think there's 5 ways to nurture that motivation. I look at these as 5 practices that will continue to help without the kind of sticker charts motivation. The first, of course, is model the behavior you want to see, okay? Which is crucial. Is, you want students to be kind, you be kind. Second is verbal praise, highlights, the effort, the action, which is very important and not labels. And the third one is natural consequences. So students learn kind of from that cause and effect, safety net. And the fourth is supporting independence, right? Offering that meaningful, age-appropriate choices. So maybe must-do, may-dos, giving them the flexibility. And the fifth one is to invest in quality time, right? Because that condition is the strongest motivator we have as educators. And none of these cost money, right? All of them build on that long-term sustainability of self-regulation for our students. And this brings me to the must-do, may-do kind of strategy that we're using in many schools. So this strategy kind of balances that structure with choice, right? Must-do tasks are those kind of non-negotiable learning goals broken into bite-sized pieces, manageable parts, right? And then the may-do are those options that provide for meaningful choices that extend student learning, right? The key goal here is that motivation is built into the learning design and not kind of added after as a reward, right? And so this approach pretty much increases engagement while really maintaining high expectations from each of your students. I feel like my last couple of presentations has referred to a car. But again, so when I think about who is driving, this pretty much asks a really important question. Who's in control of the learning, right? So when the motivation is external, the adults are kind of taking the lead and driving the car. But when the motivation is internal, students are now taking ownership of their own learning. So we know research shows that when students with an internal focus and they have an internal control device, it demonstrates higher achievement. Right? And so stronger resilience and greater sense of just mastery of certain skills and concepts. And our goal, of course, is not to control our students, but to kind of support and help them, drive their own learning. So when we think about the momentum, what gets us going? What is the momentum model? Thinking about the confidence, it doesn't come from just praise alone. It comes from students being successful, those successful experiences that we give them. And so thinking about the model, how it shows self-efficacy, develops through just awareness, alignment, action, and advancement. Okay, and so thinking about, belief, one's belief is not that kind of byproduct of success, but belief is the condition that makes success truly possible. And so our role as leaders is to design systems that build this momentum, this cyclical momentum that is sustainable at your school. So now you have the Pygmalion effect or the Rosenthal effect, right? So thinking about high expectations, growth mindset versus fixed. When teachers have high expectations of their students, of course, they do better. So when we expect more of our students, we ask deeper questions, we provide better support, and then even think about how do we design more meaningful challenges. And I think that this formula is pretty much simple. High challenges paired with high support leads to optimal growth. Rewards often lower our expectations of our students, and support really raises them. So that brings me to this. Autonomy is the fuel. When students are frequently asking, what do I get for doing this? It signals that motivation has become external. And so the more powerful question is, what can I become? Autonomy fuels identity, student agency, and long-term engagement. So this brings me to this slide. At the end of the day, the goal is to nurture, not to negotiate. So when we're thinking about when we're observing teachers' classrooms, really encouraging our teachers to continue this move. And, this is pretty much the core message. Drop the stickers, build the relationships, trust the process. When we nurture instead of kind of negotiating with students, like if you do this, I'll do this. Students don't just do things for the treat or the reward. They kind of grow into capable, confident learners. And so kind of thinking about this is how we build schools that last forever. All right. Any questions? DM me for more. Talk to you later. Bye.